I was sipping my coffee on the back deck when I first saw her Meredith Talcott storming down the dock in her wedge sandals like she owned the entire harbor. She didn't. I did, at least the part she was standing on. My name's Carter Whitlow, and I've lived on this waterfront property for close to 9 years. Built the dock myself, paid for the permits, installed the boat lift. I keep my 23-foot fishing boat, Second Wind, tied up at the end, right where it belongs. But Meredith, president of the Bay Pines HOA and self-declared queen of petty complaints, had other ideas. She didn't even knock. Just marched down like she was delivering a royal decree. "You can't keep that boat here," she snapped, arms crossed, chin lifted like she was posing for a mugshot. "That's so." I leaned against the railing, keeping calm. "Pretty sure I can. This is my private dock." "There's a clause in the HOA charter," she said, flipping through a stapled packet of paper like she was holding the Constitution. Section 12, paragraph 3. "No watercraft over 18 feet within visible range of common areas." I laughed. "Meredith, this dock is on my deed. It's not part of the HOA's jurisdiction, and the only people who can see it are the pelicans and maybe my neighbor's cat." She wasn't amused. "You're setting a bad example, Carter. The board will be taking action." "Go ahead," I said, walking past her toward the dock. "Just make sure you know the law before you try to enforce it." I figured that would be the end of it, but Meredith wasn't the type to let things drop. 2 days later, I got back from a supply run to find a towboat, yes. A marine tow vessel hovering near my dock, ropes in hand, trying to hook up to my boat. "You gotta be kidding me," I muttered, throwing my truck in park and jogging down the hill. A guy in a harbor patrol vest was standing nearby, clipboard in hand. "You the owner of the Second Wind?" "I sure am," I said, flashing my ID. "And you're about to make a big mistake if you touch that boat." He looked confused. "We got a complaint from the Bay Pines HOA. Said this boat was illegally moored on common property." "Yeah, you should probably take a look at this." I pulled out a laminated copy of my dock permits and the property map from the county assessor's office. I'd been ready for her stunts since the last time she tried to find me over my wind chimes. Harbor Patrol took one look at the documents, then radioed something back to dispatch. The towboat guys backed off immediately. "I've got no problem here," the officer said. "This dock's clearly on private land. HOA has no authority." Just then, Meredith appeared at the edge of the lot, hands on her hips, her face twisted in frustration. "I told you he's violating HOA rules." The officer held up my paperwork. "Ma'am, this dock is outside HOA boundaries. If you interfere again, you could be facing charges for filing a false report. You'll regret this," she hissed at me before storming off like a cartoon villain in a sundress. I looked at the officer. "She always like this," he chuckled. "We've had calls from her before. You wouldn't believe half the stuff she tries to pull." I believed it, and I had a feeling she wasn't done yet. By the following Thursday, Bay Pines was buzzing. Meredith's stunt with the towboat hadn't gone unnoticed. Half the residents on the bayfront had watched from their decks, binoculars and lawn chairs out like it was a fireworks show. I hadn't said a word to anyone, but word spread fast in a neighborhood like this. That weekend, I was working on the hull, just routine maintenance, when my neighbor from 2 houses down, Dennis, wandered over. He was wearing a fishing vest and carrying a can of paint thinner like it was a thermos. "Thought you might need a hand," he said casually, sitting on the dock's edge. "Heard the Admiral tried to commandeer the fleet." I laughed once through my nose but kept my hands busy, scraping off a bit of algae. "Yeah, she showed up with a tow crew like she was running a naval blockade. Almost cost the HOA a fine for false reporting." Dennis shook his head. "And you know what's funny? She ran for board president on a platform of neighborhood harmony." I didn't bother responding. Harmony wasn't exactly the vibe she was giving off these days. Later that evening, just past sunset, I was locking up the boat cover when I noticed something strange. The padlock on the dock gate, the one I always kept latched when I wasn't around, was missing. Not broken, gone. I ran my hand over the latch. No scratch marks, No signs of tampering, just missing. I checked the boat, nothing stolen, nothing moved, but someone had definitely been here. The next morning, I went straight to the hardware store and installed a motion-sensitive security camera on the dock post facing the entrance. I didn't tell anyone, not even Dennis. I wanted whoever was snooping around to walk right into it. 3 nights later, they did. It was just past midnight when the alert pinged my phone. I rolled out of bed, opened the app, and stared at the grainy footage. There she was, Meredith, hood up, flashlight in hand, stepping onto my dock like she was checking for contraband. She walked all the way out to the boat, looked around, and then retied one of the lines for no reason. It was already secure. She left exactly 3 minutes later, never noticing the camera overhead. At first, I thought about confronting her directly, but then I had a better idea. I called up an old friend of mine, Lena Morales, a local attorney who specialized in property disputes. We'd gone to the same university, and she owed me a favor from back when I helped her brother renovate a fixer-upper he bought on the cheap. "Carter, this is textbook trespassing," she said after I sent her the footage. "And if she touched anything on that boat, you could push for attempted vandalism depending on how the DA sees it." "She didn't damage anything," I said. "But she definitely wasn't invited. Still illegal," Lena replied. "And considering her position on the board, this isn't just a civil issue. You could get the sheriff involved." I paused. "What about the HOA's liability?" "That's where it gets juicy," she said, her tone sharpening. "If she was acting in any capacity as HOA president, while doing this, especially if she used HOA resources or authority, you can sue the board for breach of fiduciary duty. And if the board knew she was doing this, that's conspiracy." I thanked her and hung up. The next day, I filed a formal police report. I handed the officer a copy of the footage, the time-stamped security logs, and a notarized statement outlining the incident. He raised an eyebrow when he saw who it was. "Meredith Talcott?" he asked. "You'd be surprised how often her name comes up." "Not anymore," I said. "I want this documented, and I want a restraining order filed if she sets foot on my property again." Things moved quickly after that. By Friday, Meredith received a visit from a deputy. She must have thrown a fit because the very next day, the HOA sent out a hastily written email to the entire community, claiming that, due to recent misunderstandings, the board will be reviewing its positions on watercraft and dock access. It was damage control, plain and simple. But the real domino fell the following Monday. Lena filed a formal complaint with the county inspector's office on my behalf, along with a civil notice of intent to sue. She included screenshots of Meredith on my dock, as well as a timeline of the tow attempt, the false report to Harbor Patrol, and the footage of her trespassing. The package went straight to the county attorney, who opened an inquiry into the HOA for abuse of authority. At the same time, several other residents, ones I didn't even know well, started coming forward. One woman, Sharon, said Meredith had fined her for improperly stored holiday decorations in February. Another couple, the Leas, said their application to repaint their porch had been denied 3 times without explanation, even though the color they chose was on the approved list. It was like Meredith's chokehold on the neighborhood was finally being exposed. A week later, the board held an emergency meeting. They tried to do it quietly, but I heard about it from Dennis, whose wife baked muffins for the treasurer's daughter. I showed up with Lena and a stack of printed documents. The room went silent when we walked in. Meredith was already seated at the head of the table, looking like she'd swallowed a lemon. The rest of the board looked nervous. I could tell most of them didn't want to be there. Lena leaned over the microphone. "My client has brought forth credible evidence of criminal trespass, abuse of authority, and malicious intent by the acting board president. We're prepared to file suit against both the HOA and Miss Talcott individually." Meredith scoffed. "This is outrageous. He's weaponizing the legal system over a boat." Lena didn't blink. "No, he's defending his property rights against an out-of-control HOA that thinks it can rewrite the law." Then she handed out copies of the footage, the police report, and the county's response letter confirming the HOA had no jurisdiction over privately deeded docks. The treasurer cleared his throat. We weren't aware she'd gone onto your property. I glanced at Meredith. I think you were aware of a lot more than you're admitting. Lena turned to the board. You have two choices. Remove her from the presidency and issue a public apology, or we proceed. If we file, we will subpoena HOA communications, spending records, and any correspondence related to Mr. Whitlow's property. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Then the secretary, a quiet older man named George, spoke up. I vote to remove Miss Talcott from the board effective immediately. One by one, the others followed. Even the vice president, who had aligned with Meredith during the last vote, bowed his head and said, Agreed. Meredith stood up so fast her chair clattered to the floor. You're making a huge mistake, she snapped, eyes burning holes into everyone in the room. I built this community. No, I said calmly. You tried to control it. There's a difference. She stormed out without another word. Lena turned to me as the board began to quietly discuss how to draft the apology. That went better than expected, she said. Yeah, I replied. But I've got a feeling she's not done stirring the water. She wasn't. But that's a story for another day. 3 days after Meredith was ousted, a certified envelope showed up in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper unsigned, printed in all caps and filled with typos. It accused me of disrespecting the spirit of the neighborhood and warned that some people don't forgive so easy. The punctuation was a disaster, and the tone read like someone trying to sound threatening but too cowardly to use their real name. I handed it over to the sheriff's department the same afternoon. Deputy Laramie, the same officer who had handled the initial trespassing report, took one look at it and sighed. Looks like someone's getting desperate, he muttered. We'll keep it on file. Let me know if anything else shows up. I figured that would be the last gasp of a sore loser, but then something worse happened. On a Thursday morning just before sunrise, I got a call from the county assessor's office. Mr. Whitlow, the woman said. We received an amendment request regarding your property lines. It was flagged because it contradicts existing records. I sat up straighter. What kind of amendment? The document submitted claims your dock sits partially on HOA-controlled land. It's been filed under a property reassessment petition signed by a board representative. My grip tightened on the phone. That's fraud. Who signed it? There was a pause. A Miss Meredith Talcott. I drove straight to the county office and reviewed the document myself. The signature was hers, sloppy but unmistakable. The attached diagram was a crude sketch showing my dock extending over a phantom sliver of land labeled Bay Pines Public Easement. There was no such easement. I'd had the land surveyed by a licensed firm when I first built the dock, and the legal records were airtight. I asked the clerk to make copies, then marched them straight to Lena. This crosses the line, she said as she flipped through the paperwork. She submitted a forged boundary claim to a government office. That's a felony. What do we do next? I asked. We don't do anything, she replied. We let the district attorney handle it. By the end of the day, Lena had submitted a package to the county DA's office containing sworn affidavits from the original surveyor, certified property maps, and a notarized expert statement confirming the forgery. The DA didn't waste time. They opened a criminal investigation into Meredith for filing fraudulent documents with the intent to alter property records. That wasn't the only thing that came to light. When investigators subpoenaed HOA communications related to the forged filing, they uncovered a trove of internal emails between Meredith and 2 former board members. The messages revealed a coordinated effort to redefine property boundaries of several waterfront homes mine, included under the pretense of clarifying dock access regulations. Basically, they were trying to quietly redraw the lines so the HOA could seize control of private docks and impose rental fees on the owners. The scheme had been in motion for months, and mine was just the first test. When the DA's office announced the investigation, the fallout hit like a landslide. The current board, trying to distance itself from the scandal, issued a public statement condemning Meredith's actions and confirming that none of the current members had voted on any boundary amendments. Whether that was true or not, they were now scrambling to save face. The county placed a temporary injunction on all HOA enforcement actions until the investigation concluded. That meant no fines, no citations, no enforcement of any kind. The entire HOA was frozen, but Meredith wasn't done. One evening, just before dusk, I was out on the deck rinsing off bait buckets when I noticed a black SUV creeping past the house for the third time. I watched it roll by slowly, headlights off, and disappear down the hill toward the Marina Road. A few hours later, I reviewed the footage from the dock camera. The SUV had pulled up just past midnight, and someone had walked down to the dock and yanked the camera clean off the post. This time, I called the sheriff's department immediately. Deputy Laramie showed up again, this time with another officer and a digital evidence technician. They dusted the post for prints and reviewed the remaining footage from my secondary camera, the one mounted under the eave of the house. It had a wide angle and caught the SUV's license plate as it backed up. It was registered to Meredith's cousin, a man with 3 prior arrests for misdemeanor trespass and petty vandalism. He lived in the next county but had visited Bay Pines several times in recent months, according to property logs. That was enough for a judge to issue a search warrant. When deputies searched the cousin's home, they found my missing camera in a box in the garage along with a folder labeled HOA Plan B. Inside were printed maps, notes on several waterfront properties, and what looked like drafted notices threatening to revoke dock access unless compliance fees were paid. It was a whole blueprint for coercion. The cousin was arrested on the spot. That's when the story went public. A local news station picked up the investigation, and the headline ran across the evening broadcast. HOA president under criminal investigation for dock seizure scheme. They even showed a blurred-out screenshot of Meredith walking on my dock from the original footage. Bay Pines exploded. Residents were furious. A group of them, led by Sharon, the woman Meredith had cited for holiday decorations, formed a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. They gathered signatures for a recall election, and within 72 hours, over 2/3 of the neighborhood had signed on. The recall passed in a landslide, but it didn't stop there. The DA's office formally charged Meredith with 2 counts, falsifying government documents and conspiracy to defraud property owners. The cousin was charged with criminal trespass and destruction of private property. The former board members who had exchanged emails with Meredith were subpoenaed as witnesses, and one of them flipped, handing over even more internal documents that showed just how far the plan was meant to go. Apparently, the ultimate goal had been to turn Bay Pines into a semi-private marina community, where dock usage could be leased to outsiders for a fee. Meredith had even drafted a proposal to partner with a local real estate firm offering priority dock access to buyers willing to pay a premium. It was about profit, not policy. With the HOA dissolved, the neighborhood voted to establish a voluntary civic association instead. No fines, no enforcement power, just a community newsletter and a shared calendar for events. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Dennis stopped by one afternoon with a 6-pack and a grin. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said, cracking open a can. "No more patrols, no more permission slips to paint your shutters," I nodded toward the dock. "And no more midnight sabotage," he raised his can. "To freedom." I clinked mine against his and took a long sip. The new civic group asked me to serve on their advisory board, and I agreed on one condition: that any and all decisions be recorded, published, and subject to community vote. No closed-door meetings, no hidden agendas. If people didn't like something, they could say so. Loudly, the dock is still standing, the second wind still bobbing gently at its post. And the camera. I replaced it with one on the dock, one under the eave again, just in case someone else gets any bright ideas, but for now the water's calm. By the time the dust settled, Meredith had vanished from Bay Pines entirely. Her house went dark. No cars. No lights. Just an empty shell of a place surrounded by trimmed hedges and a wilted Community First sign still staked in the yard like some bitter joke. Rumor had it she skipped town the same week her court date was announced. No one seemed eager to track her down, but the damage she left behind wasn't done unraveling. A month after the dissolution of the HOA, I received a certified subpoena from the state attorney general's office. At first, I thought it was a follow-up to the criminal case against Meredith. But this was something else entirely. It named me as a material witness in a civil investigation, one that involved not only the Bay Pines HOA, but a network of property management consultants who had been contracting with neighborhood boards across the county. According to the documents, Meredith had been working with a consulting firm called Anchor Ridge Solutions. On paper, they provided community governance support. In practice, they were advising HOAs on how to quietly modify property boundaries, insert restrictive covenants into existing charters, and pressure homeowners into signing away usage rights in exchange for compliance waivers. What made it worse? Anchor Ridge had received public grants for community improvement initiatives under a state pilot program, which meant taxpayer money, my money, had helped bankroll the blueprint Meredith used to try and seize my dock. I drove up to the AG's office in Tallahassee the next day for a sworn deposition. The investigator, a lean man in his 50s with a military haircut and a voice like gravel, took me through everything: footage, timeline, documents, even the original tow attempt. "Did she ever mention Anchor Ridge by name?" he asked, flipping through a folder. "No," I said. "But she did say something about a regional strategy and how Bay Pines was going to be a model community. At the time, I thought she was just puffing herself up." He scribbled a note. "That fits. We've got internal emails from their consultants using phrases like pilot enforcement zones and scalable dock regulation. You weren't the only target." I leaned forward. "How many neighborhoods are we talking about?" 17 so far, 3 counties. But Bay Pines is the only one where someone fought back with documentation and legal action. That's why you're sitting here." That night, I sat on the deck staring out at the water, wondering how close we'd come to losing more than just a few property rights, if I hadn't installed that camera. If I hadn't kept all the original permits, if I'd just rolled over when the towboat showed up. Dennis showed up around 9 carrying a folder under his arm and a bottle of rye in the other. He handed me the folder. "You're in the county paper," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "Front page." I flipped it open. There I was, an unflattering photo of me in my work clothes pointing toward the dock during the public hearing. The headline read, "Local man exposes HOA scheme tied to state corruption probe." "Guess I'm a local hero now," I said, raising an eyebrow. "Could have told you that," Dennis replied, uncorking the bottle. "But now it's official." The article detailed how the county had launched an oversight audit on all HOA contracts involving Anchor Ridge Solutions. The governor had frozen their funding. And a joint task force had been assembled to review similar claims from other homeowners. Apparently, my case had cracked open something much larger than anyone expected. Still, the neighborhood was raw. Without the HOA, things felt unmoored for a while. Some folks missed the routine even if it came with a side of tyranny. But most were just relieved that someone had finally pulled the curtain back. 2 weeks later, Sharon, who had taken over organizing community events, approached me with a proposal. Not for another HOA. No one wanted that. But a cooperative harbor council made up of dock owners and waterfront residents with no enforcement power, just mutual agreements and shared resources. "We don't need rules to keep us civil," she said. "Just neighbors willing to talk instead of threaten." I agreed on the spot. The first meeting was held at the marina's old rec hall. No dress code, no agendas, just folding chairs, a whiteboard, and a potluck table that sagged under the weight of casseroles and key lime pies. People brought their kids. Someone set up a speaker and played classic rock. It felt more like a reunion than a council. There were no power plays, no arguments, just suggestions, dock maintenance schedules, shared security lighting, and ideas for a community kayak rack. Nobody tried to seize anything. Nobody threatened to tow a boat. Afterward, as I walked back along the shoreline with Sharon, she asked something that caught me off guard. "Do you think she believed what she was doing was right?" I thought about it for a long moment. "I think she believed she was entitled to more control than she ever earned," I said. "And when people didn't hand it over, she decided to take it instead." Sharon nodded. "Well, she picked the wrong dock." A month later, Meredith was officially indicted. The DA charged her with conspiracy to commit fraud, tampering with government records, and misuse of public funds. Anchor Ridge Solutions folded days after the charges were announced. Their executives were under federal investigation for grant fraud. No one from the company showed up to the deposition hearings. Their offices were vacated overnight. The final cherry on top came in the form of a restitution order. The court required Meredith to pay back legal fees for every homeowner she targeted. She had to sell her house, her car, and, according to a whisper from the court clerk, even her jewelry collection. I received a check in the mail small, considering the hours I'd spent fighting. But it wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. With the HOA gone, the neighborhood slowly found its rhythm again. People painted their houses whatever color they liked. Holiday decorations stayed up as long as folks wanted. Lawn flamingos returned in force. The place felt alive. One evening, I was out on the boat with Dennis and Sharon, rods cast and beers in hand. The sun dipped low over the water, bathing everything in orange and gold. A heron glided across the inlet, landing silently on the far piling. Dennis reeled in a small snapper and held it up. "You think she's watching this from wherever she landed? If she is," I said. "I hope she's taking notes." We laughed, not out of spite but relief, the kind that comes when you know the worst of it is behind you. I looked out over the water, the boat gently rocking beneath us, and felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Earned, not given. The second wind drifted quietly, the dock behind us standing strong. Not just wood and nails anymore. A symbol. A line that someone tried to cross